Hey retro gamers. Today on Smashing Bricks, we foil the plans of the evil Shredder in Teenage Mutant Ninja Donatello. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Hey, welcome back to Smashing Bricks, a retro gaming podcast. This is episode 24. My name is Eddie Inzauto, and today I'm joined by a returning guest, the man known as the Green Tank. It's Mark Besada of the Board Game Barrage podcast. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Eddie, how are you?
Good. How are you? Everything going well in, New York City, where the turtles live?
Oh yeah, no, I guess not. I guess there are big time issues in NYC.
Yeah,
a lot of pizza though. A lot of pizza, unsurprisingly.
Lots of pizza.
I guess not enough pizza if you've played this game.
Yeah, depends. It depends on your experience.
Right.
We'll find out if it was delivered in 30 minutes or less.
Sure.
All right. So before we get into that, though, I don't think I've done this with you. With some of my new guests, I've been doing a quick Q&A session before we start so that our listeners can sort of get an idea of where you're coming from with your retro gaming opinions.
Perfect.
Right off the bat, what is your favorite game genre?
My favorite game genre. Okay, well, nowadays it's pretty tough to say, and obviously we're going to keep this away from board games. But in terms of video games nowadays, I'd have to say sports simulation games. Nowadays, so like the quintessential one, which is one that is so good that I can't play it anymore because I know I'll just have all my time sucked away, is Football Manager, which is like the preeminent soccer management game. But there are a bunch of browser-based sports simulation or sports management games that I like playing, just because I, for whatever reason, like the very heavy like hand-eye coordination stuff, I don't really get into so much. And I like the sort of puzzly nature of the sim games or the management games, married to like sports, which is something I'm in general interested in. So that's probably where I'm at now. As a kid, I was much more into RPGs. Those were my games like growing up. Like during the times where my brother was mainly playing games like TMNT, and I was sort of his sidekick. The games I was mainly playing were like the old RPGs.
So still not the Twitch action sort of skill-based games. Yeah, cool. All right, so let's move on to question 2. What is your favorite video game console generation, and what kind of is your limit, your most recently participated in console generation? Because we talked about how you kind of fell off of video games.
Right. So the most recent one that I played with any regularity would be like PlayStation 2. Like right around PlayStation 2 is when I sort of fell off. Latest memory of like playing a game with any regularity would have been in college, playing GoldenEye, which was like a whole like seemed like it was everybody who I knew at that time was playing GoldenEye in their dorm room. So that would have been like the last game that I played with any regularity. In terms of like the golden age for me of playing games was 100% the NES, like the original NES. Me and my brother were huge fanatics, and we had friends coming over all the time. I still remember, it's so weird, but I still remember the number of games we had. It was 52 games. We were like very proud of that. We had 52 games, and we had friends who would come over and play them. So NES was where I was like on the cutting edge of gaming. We were, subscribed to Nintendo Power and EGM and all that stuff. I was really, really in tune with the culture, but ended around N64, I would say.
Okay. All right. So let's see right between there. It sounds like you were a Nintendo kid and then still a Nintendo kid when the N64 came out. What about the biggest console war, the Super Nintendo versus the Sega Genesis? Which side do you land on there?
See, it's funny because I, you know, I always wanted to be sort of the renegade. Like we were fortunate enough that we had a bunch of consoles growing up. So I had like the Atari, was it the 7600? And I had the Mega Drive, which I think I had to go to some weird video game store, like somewhere in the outskirts of the valley in Southern California to find.
Interesting. So an import console?
Yeah.
The Genesis, but from Japan or Europe?
I think it was from Europe. But I can't remember if Mega Drive was the same time as NES or would it have been the same time as Super Nintendo. I can't remember what it was, but it was certainly a console that none of my friends had, and we were able to get games, just a couple that nobody else had and weren't available at like stores that were in the area. I had like a Genesis. I had, what was the handheld from Sega?
Game Gear.
Game Gear, that's right. I was really, really hyped on the Game Gear, the Lynx. I was always trying to sort of root for be the guy who was like the non-Nintendo guy and say, oh, actually, and I think in some cases, in fact, speaking of sports, I think a lot of the sports games on the Genesis felt better than the Super Nintendo and that kind of stuff. But in general, it was hard to argue that the quality of the overall library of the Nintendo games were better than the Sega or the competitors, as much as I, at the time wanted to be the contrarian.
Interesting. Wow, you really got into a lot of cool stuff. That sounds awesome.
I was cool at one point.
Yeah.
in the distant past.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. If you could pick a single retro game and remake it with improvements, which game would that be, and what would the improvements be that stand out to you?
Interesting. It's definitely going to be an RPG. And I wish I could remember them better. There was a line of RPGs that came out, I think started with the Nintendo. Was it Dungeon Master? I cannot recall the name, but I just remember really loving the immersion of those old RPGs, but always hitting like a wall where I felt the difficulty was sort of off-putting, and I would, and this was sort of like a common thing, at least for me and my brother and for our friends. I don't know if this was something that a lot of people encountered back in the day when we were playing these games.
Was it Dragon Warrior by any chance?
Dragon Warrior, maybe that's it. Yeah, I think that might have been the
grind
one. I remember
was real in Dragon Warrior.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And it would just eventually sort of like put us off, and we would just move on to the next thing. So I think, sort of some of the modern sensibilities of making games a little, more digestible, for lack of a better term, or just like sort of like more user friendly. It always felt like, you were, and there's a charm to it, but I felt like as a kid you were sort of battling the game, like almost like you felt like the developers or the designers wanted to beat you. Like there was some adversarial quality of those games, and that there's a charm to that, and there's like a reward when you defeat them. But there's also a lot of times you would just get to a point where like, I just don't want to do this anymore, and we would just move on to something else. So I think if those games had been a little more, accessible, easier to play, I would have enjoyed them a lot more.
Gotcha. As if they actually wanted you to see their entire game.
Exactly. 100%.
As opposed to send you away with your tail between your legs.
100%. Exactly that.
Okay, last one. Do you have a favorite video game of all time, and what is it?
Oh my gosh, favorite video game of all time. I really should. I like having things in lists. And I like to have the idea. I like to feel like I know what my favorite X of all time is. My favorite game of all time. You know what? This is probably the answer. Is
Biblios.
This is obscure, right? No, this is pretty obscure. And I don't even know if it qualifies as a video game because we played it on my Apple IIc, but Pool of Radiance, which was a Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game that we played on my Apple computer, my old Apple IIc computer. And that game sort of like took over our lives for like at least a year, where my best friend would come over, and me and my brother would all create characters like in Dungeons and Dragons style, and we would go on these missions, and we would like, spam gold and buy all these really cool like magical weapons, and I would have my role, like I was the archer in the back, and my brother would be the barbarian, and it just was like this really cool campaign that we did. That we would make up our own lore. We had this whole thing. So I think my best gaming experience was Pool of Radiance on the Apple IIc.
Wow, that's an awesome answer. Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons is really cool. If I were to make like a Dungeons and Dragons party right now, I'd probably have 4 characters. They'd each like use a different weapon, and I'd probably name them after famous artists, painters, sculptors, you know?
I think that's that is a never before done take, so that is ingenious.
Amazing. Yeah, so that brings us right to our game. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the Nintendo Entertainment System is what we played. And we may or may not have had some history with it. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, why don't you give the listeners a brief overview of what we're talking about here? What is this game?
So this is, as you said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This was the first game on consoles, as far as I'm aware, featuring the Turtles. It sort of is a side scroller for the most part, although there's like a top down section or two in it. You were playing as the 4 turtles. I don't know how far we want to get into it, but it has a sort of interesting system where you are playing them all simultaneously, and you don't lose when one of them dies. You sort of like can jump between them, and once one of them loses all their health, they are sort of considered captured, and once all 4 are captured, you die. But it's a number of levels. I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 levels, and you got Shredder at the end, and you're trying to save April and save the city.
Yeah, basic, but not quite so basic kind of action platformer.
Yeah,
definitely
some interesting twists,
maybe, or maybe not. So that's the overview. What was your history with this game back in the day? Did you play it a lot? Did you have it? What's the deal?
Yes, definitely had it, because my household was a huge Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle household. My brother was a turtle fanatic. He was obsessed with the Turtles. He took karate, obviously, because of the Turtles, because like all our friends had brothers who did or did. But my brother was insane. Like, he got to the point where like he wouldn't accept you besmirching like any of the Turtles like qualities. Like, if you said one was better than the other, he would get upset. Like, he was insane about the Turtles. He bought all the merchandise. He went as far as to buy sais, the weapon that Raphael uses, like the
Real
actual
ones?
sais. Yeah, he went to some like karate store or something and bought legitimate sais. I think he bought a Ninja Star, but so yeah, he loved the Turtles. He was obsessed with them, and so as soon as this game came out, we bought it for sure. So definitely was not my first time playing the game for this episode for sure.
Awesome. When you were younger, did you manage to make it through the game?
So I was trying to remember this, because my first inclination when I started playing it and I started looking at it was that we got stuck, as many people did, in the water level. And we, again, as I sort of mentioned earlier, like, we would get to points where we would get, frustrated, and we would sort of move on. But then, I was able to get past that, now in replaying it, and then seeing the further levels, it did trigger memories. So we must have gotten past it. I don't think we ever beat the game. But we definitely got through a lot of it, but again, not very often. It was certainly not a game that I think we ever, in any level, mastered, I would say.
Yeah, well, it's a tough one to master, I think.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience, I think. I didn't actually own this game. I don't think I owned it, but I know at least 3 of my friends had it, because it sold pretty well, which we'll talk about in a bit. And I used to play their copy. We would just trade and borrow games and stuff. But
right.
I never beat it as a kid. I remember it being pretty difficult. And as far as I can recall, I made it to maybe the fourth area, which is the airport, I guess, where you're kind of making your way through a maze of sewers to try to get to the end. Possibly I made it past that, but that's the one that I always remember kind of being the stopping point in my memory. Since then, because it was a big part of my childhood, I had revisited it at some point over the years, and I did beat the game. And yeah, I've always been a big fan of this game, and I would usually defend it as one of the better Turtles games because of its differences from the standard arcade games that were much more popular and well known. And I don't know if that has been the most popular opinion, or maybe this is just a divisive game, but we'll see. So yeah, I had a lot of experience with it. But the game itself came out in 1989 in the US and Japan, and then the following year in PAL regions. It was developed by Konami, but back in this time, I don't know if you knew this, Nintendo had this policy to try to prevent a recurrence of the video game crash of 1983 by not allowing publishers to publish too many games per year on their console.
Yeah, I had heard of this. Yeah.
So this game came out under the brand Ultra Games in the US and Palcom in PAL regions, which were both essentially just shell companies of Konami to get around this 5-game per year limit that Nintendo imposed.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was a Konami game, though. It was developed by Konami. It was just released with a different name in the different regions. There's not a lot of history about this game's development process, but we can kind of place it among other Turtles media at the time, right? It was during Turtle Mania, essentially.
Right.
We had the cartoon that came out here in the States in 1987. And this game, as I said, came out in 1989. So it was just a couple of years after, or like a year and a half. But licensing for this game, the discussions, really began in 1986. And we can also assume by the length of time that video games were developed back then, roughly about a year most games took, give or take. So we can assume it began development in 1988, kind of shortly after the cartoon came out. So we can then conclude, and there's evidence of this and discussions of this in the past, that the game is kind of based more off of the original comic from Mirage Studios, with just a few elements of the cartoon included, because they had an idea of what was in the cartoon and they could throw in things like maybe a couple characters. But for the most part, it was kind of a game about the comic with awareness that the cartoon had become popular already. And you even see that in the box art, where that box art is literally the same or slightly altered from one of the comic book covers, issue number 4 of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic. And on the box, they even all have their red bandanas like they used to in the comics. That kind of explains some missing things that we might find in the game. Like if you're a fan of Krang, for example, we didn't see Krang, right? You watched the cartoon when you were a kid?
Again, because my brother would insist on having them on. So yeah, I'm very familiar with the old cartoons for sure.
I own the TV right now. After school time. It's Turtles.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. So another interesting fact about this that kind of tells us a little bit more about the way it was developed was that the cartoon actually didn't even reach Japan until 1991. And Konami was a Japanese company. They had a fairly new American branch, but the development at this time was Japanese. It was in Japan. So the cartoon not coming to Japan until 1991, again, that's limiting what they have to draw from. And also, when it finally did come to Japan, it was licensed out in a weird way, so there were multiple versions of the cartoon. It is really interesting to look into. If anyone's interested in that, check that out. You'll see that there are a few different Turtles cartoons in Japan.
I had no idea. That's actually, I would like to dive into that given my history, so that's cool. That's
yeah,
cool to know.
Your brother probably knows.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that makes this game literally the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles product released in Japan ever, because the comic books were made by Mirage Comics, which is an American publisher based right in New Hampshire, well, and then Connecticut and Massachusetts, but it was an American publisher, so American comic. And Japan got this as their first thing. This was the introduction to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for all the little Japanese boys and girls.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there it was released as Geki Kame Ninja Den, which translates to Legend of the Radical Ninja Turtles or Legend of the Powerful Ninja Turtles. I don't speak a word of Japanese. I'm just taking the internet's word for it. But I like that. Legend of the Radical Ninja Turtles. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So this game also predates the arcade game, which, again, like I said, was pretty famous. This was the one that eventually came to the Nintendo as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, in 1990, and really kind of lightens the mood and brings in more of those TV series mainstays and elements. So it becomes a little bit more recognizable as what we saw on, our local TV station on syndication. You play that one?
Oh yeah, I remember that arcade game being crazy popular.
Yeah.
At whatever arcade I'd visit as a kid, like that 4-player arcade cabinet was everywhere at the time.
God, so much fun. Yeah, that one was more of like get to the arcade with your buddies, throw in quarters, and just go to town.
Mash buttons. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely a different approach. But that was probably the more common approach to making a licensed game. And when you think about this as a licensed game, licensed games were trash back then. Like they were just literal garbage for the most part, except for like a few outstanding examples that buck that trend. So, that there were Turtles games that were good at all is really lucky, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
One last thing. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were called the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles in the UK. Why? The cartoon came out as the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, and then this game was also called the Teenage Mutant Hero. I can't even say it. It's so ridiculous. It's like, It's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. And this was because there was this insane, harebrained idea and fear and crackdown on anything ninja related in the UK. They were just afraid of ninja. I don't know, propaganda. What was it going to do? So there was no ninja stuff. And this was mentioned in the Ninja Gaiden episode earlier in the show's history, where it had a different name also because of this same thing, because it came out the same year, I believe.
So strange.
So that's pretty nuts. Actually, yeah, I read that for a while there in the late 80s, early 90s, you weren't even allowed to depict nunchucks on TV and in movies.
Wow.
Though I did sample the UK version, the PAL version of this game, and Mikey's nunchucks were intact. So I don't know if they were just not detailed enough that it was okay, because maybe they looked like a bendy stick or something, but they were there.
Weird.
Yeah, so that was the most I have for the history of the development, which was not about the history of development, really. I don't know anything about the history of the development. We just know where this game came in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles history. But interesting enough as it is, I think. In 1990, the game was ported to a bunch of the sort of home computer systems: the Amiga, Amstrad CPC, the Atari ST, Commodore 64, MS-DOS, the MSX, the ZX Spectrum, and Nintendo's PlayChoice 10. And it was a success. This game was a pretty big success. I think it was actually packed in with the NES at one point in the UK. And in the first year, it sold 1 million copies in the US and then 4 million after 18 months, making Konami about $125 million. It was also the UK's top Spectrum game for 6 months running in 1991. So, yeah, people love the Turtles. Turtle Mania.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was Turtle Mania, did I make that up or is that what it was called?
I think
it just came out.
I think that's right. I think that was what it was called back then.
Maybe I was mixing it up with Hulkamania? Turtle Mania, Hulkamania.
There's a
lot of mania.
Manias back then, yeah.
Right. Yeah, we were all just going crazy. And this era was a big era for the Nintendo. And Turtles was kind of like a well fleshed out game compared to some of the older games and even compared to some of the ones coming out around that time. It was re-released in 2007 on the Wii Virtual Console and subsequently removed due to some licensing issues in 2012, so long lived there. And I just found this out, August 2022, August of last year, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga Collection was released for Nintendo Switch, PS4, PS5, Steam, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. And that included 13 classic Turtles games.
Yeah, I ran into this doing research myself, and I had no idea so many Turtles games even existed. But it was cool to see that there was that re-release last year, so still in the zeitgeist.
I thought maybe I should just, buy that and play all those that way. That's pretty cool. I feel like, presuming that's a good port, I would say go buy that, because there are a lot of really good Turtles games. There's this one, the 3 on the Nintendo. There was Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo. There was the one for Genesis. I forget what it's called, but it was kind of Turtles in Time-ish. I think it might have had the Tournament Fighters game on there. It's pretty cool. Seems cool. And there were a bunch of newer ones that I wasn't as familiar with. Original reviews. Do you remember what the reviews were around the time when it came out? Since you said you had the magazine subscriptions, you were kind of tapped in. What did you think the reception was?
I thought the reception was generally positive. I remember that the critical response was generally positive, but I remember there was some like that were middling to negative. But I do remember that, unless this is a false memory, but I could swear that, Nintendo Power every year they would have like the readers pick their games of the year and they're all this like of the year stuff. And I'm pretty sure the year TMNT came out, it was the readers game of the year that year. But I do remember it being like pretty positive critically for the most part. But it was definitely not unanimous, but it was generally positive.
Yeah, that was my recollection also, and that bore out in some research. Pretty positive. I saw, just a few examples: 80%, 8.25 out of 10, 90%, 94%. EGM kind of hated it. They gave it whatever was 23 out of 40, something like that, which is like 58%. But I read some non-numbered reviews, just commentary, and it was like, oh, this game is great. It handles this license very well. I wasn't even a Turtles fan, and I thought this was a great game. It gave me so much more than a lot of the other stuff that was out at the time. It was great.
Right.
When it was re-released, though, in 2007, the game was trashed. And now, since then, it seems to have a pretty negative reputation. Which I was aware of people like thinking it wasn't great, like people thinking that the arcade games were the superior ones, but I never thought that it had this poor reputation. Were you aware of that?
I think that I was because I think it did really suffer when compared to the popularity of the arcade game. I think that's what really, really sort of put things into stark relief. I remember the feeling at the time when playing the Nintendo version and playing the arcade version, and just thinking like the arcade version is just so much more fun. Like I think there's way more to the NES version or to the console version, but I think if you had polled 20 of my friends at the time, like which one do you want to play, I think they would have all picked the arcade version. I think that made the console version just feel way lesser in relation.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, is which one's more fun. Probably the arcade games. They're made for fun. This one was more made for like depth and exploration, maybe, or we'll find out. But I think a big part of the excessive negativity creeping into the reviews in 2007 was, people have different opinions, so anyone can review games however they want. B, time has passed, the game has aged. But C, when this game came out, it was about a year after the angry video game nerd kind of got his start, and he became pretty popular. He was one of the earliest, over the top, hyperbolic, kind of annoying people who just make videos for comedy and act excessively mad about things on the internet, which then actually leaked into real video game journalism. We got the era of like snark just dripping into news reporting, dripping into editorial content and reviews, where everyone was like in a race to become the most snarky. And this was basically one of this guy's earliest viral videos. It was about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And that was like just not even a full year before the game came back out on the Virtual Console. So I have to wonder, if that video didn't come out, how would those reviews look without that preceding them? Because everyone, takes influence from everything they've experienced. And it could be part of that. Like, oh yeah, I think he's got some good points about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's what they thought. And that was the majority of the history. Let's see where we landed, because we could have gone either way, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So we played it. Did you finish it?
I did finish it.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Thanks to some research online about basically broken strategies. But okay. Yes,
yeah. There's a lot of that. Like, there's a lot available in this game to tinker with and use to your advantage, because you have to, right? It's using everything in its wonky programming to take you down to its advantage. Where should we start here? So we gave a little bit of an overview of the game, but maybe we should revisit more in depth. We talked about how there are 4 characters and you could switch between them, but they're all the 4 turtles. We know them as different characters in the fiction. They all have different weapons, and that plays heavily into the gameplay, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about those differences between these 4 turtles that we're switching between throughout this game.
Okay, so you've got. I'll start like sort of on a tier here. And I will start with the turtle that was always. Well, no. I'm going to start with the F tier, which was he was S tier in my heart. I loved him. I loved the character Raphael. He was always my favorite. But he is definitely the the sort of soaking up damage for you in this game. So Raphael has the sais, the aforementioned sais, which are the quickest weapon in the game. So they you can use them the most repeatedly, but they have a minuscule range. Like they are like, I don't know, a very, very small number of pixels constitute Raphael's sais. Working up from there, I would say, is Michelangelo. He would be the next step up. He has the nunchucks, and they are bigger, not quite as fast as Raphael, but sort of like a bigger radius. From there, you have the two turtles that I consider the only ones you want to play with mostly during the game, which are the next tier up would be Leonardo with his sword. So the sword is not as fast as the previous two, but it has a bigger sort of hitbox, I guess you would call it.
Mm-hmm.
And it has feels like stronger than the other two. It feels like it does more damage. And then you have the one that you want to save and you want to use during the, as much as you can, but you just don't want to risk him ever going out, because if Donatello goes out, you're going out. So Donatello has the slowest weapon. His bow staff is the slowest, but it is the strongest and it has by far the biggest radius. So, Donatello is the turtle you need for sure.
Absolutely. Donatello, clearly and obviously the best turtle. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Negatives to Donatello: his bow staff, it only swings in like a straight line. So there's no arc to it, right? It goes in a straight line forward, a straight line up, or a straight line down, which can be hard to aim potentially, right? If you're being sort of crowded by enemies, you might miss. Okay, so there's a negative for him, just to throw that out there. The second strongest is actually Raphael, based on some testing I did, hitting the same enemy. I used the fire guy, which I don't know what he's called, but we'll call him the fire guy. It's an enemy made of fire that throws fire at you. And one of those would take 4 hits from Leo and Mike, 3 hits from Raphael, and 2 hits from Donatello. So he kind of makes up with speed and a little bit of extra strength over his abysmal range. He has like a good arc to his hits. Like it kind of covers an up and forward and a back and forward in the high swing. But he can't reach anything. And that's terrible because these enemies are typically bouncing all around. They're moving pretty quickly. They're
for sure
coming at you a lot. But if you're in an area where there are enemies that are coming in groups and they happen to be enemies that Raph can 1-hit and Mike and Leo need to 2-hit, he can be useful. Like, for example, Raphael can one-shot the bugs, the insects that fly back and forth in levels in groups. He'll one-shot them, and Mike and Leo will not. And that can be important if you're trying to make a jump and hit some while you're jumping. So
that's fair. Yeah.
I did that test with the fire guy because I had to know. I needed to know why Raphael existed, and I think I found out. It's just like, I can't hit anybody without them hitting me. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so those are the weapons. Those are the turtles. I agree with you about like using Donatello basically all the time, and when he gets into danger, switching out to someone else until I can access pizza, healing Donatello, and playing as Donatello again.
100%.
That's the game to me.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this game is about managing health. So if you have Donatello down and then you go to your second turtle and now he goes down, you got to go to the third turtle, come back, heal Donatello. It's health management.
And that's interesting. I sort of think that's an interesting, way to handle things, as opposed to like having a turtle, then if they die, you lose. Like the fact that you can flip between them, and you that whole health management thing being a part of it. I always thought that was, even when we played it for the first time all those years back, I always thought that was an interesting take on health and keeping your characters alive.
Yeah, it's basically like one extended health bar you have, just broken into 4 chunks, visually or practically. But the other thing that does is it lets you use a lot of sub items, right? Because you can get a few sub items. So what are the secondary items? I think this is a lot like the last game we played together, right? The first game we played together, Castlevania, which was also a Konami game, and it had the sub weapons. So, but what did we have here?
So we had the boomerangs, right?
Yeah.
We had the ninja stars. I'm actually not going to remember all these. We had, what else was there?
We had the triple shuriken.
Oh, that's right. That's right. the number one and the only reason I beat the game is you have the scrolls.
Yes.
The scrolls are if I learned one thing about how to play this game, it is when you can farm the scrolls, you farm the scrolls. Like that is a requirement. Yes. That is the only reason I beat this game.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, those are the 4. Oh, and then there's the one that's exceedingly rare. It's the turtle face. I don't know what it's called. I was going to look it up in the instruction manual, but I didn't get to it.
Right.
Where you're basically invincible. Your character turns into a little ball and starts spinning around the screen and just killing everything in one hit, which is amazing. But it's so rare, I almost wonder why it was even there. Because the only times I remember it was in places where I thought, okay, I could have done this without that. I could have used it earlier. Like, you could have given it to me in this other part, but yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't get the boomerang this entire playthrough. I saw it one time or maybe 2 times, and I wasn't able to grab it. And I didn't get to use the boomerang. The boomerang's actually my favorite, even though I think the scroll is better, because the scroll creates this wave, an arc that you shoot out in front of you, and it goes across the whole screen. And I believe it penetrates through the enemy and it can hit multiple enemies, right? Like it can hit the one behind them.
There is no thinking that the scroll is 100% better. The scroll is better.
No argument.
I'm just, as a public service announcement to anybody who is listening to this and who's going to be playing it soon, get the scroll.
Yeah.
If you see the scroll and you see the boomerang, for love of God, please just take the scroll.
I mean, the boomerang's fun though. Isn't the boomerang
super fun?
Shooting them out, having them go back and forth, jumping up, catching them.
They're so weak, but it is super fun. I love that mechanism.
Yeah, you could put a few of them out there on screen at a time.
For sure.
And then you can they're unlimited because they come back to you as long as you catch them.
Keep catching them.
You don't lose the number, which is cool because these are limited. Cool. They're like ammunition.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, the scroll's the best. Now, the reason you want to be really strict about these items that you're getting is because the game is not easy, right? No. The game is cheap.
That's true.
What can you tell us about the aspects of this game that make it a challenge that maybe someone might just give up on this game for?
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of things. I think there is an elephant in the room that I guess I'll try to hit last, but there's a lot of times in this game where, you'll go through most of the level and then there'll be a jump at the end. And if you miss the jump, you have to like go through the entire level over again with all the enemies respawned, but none of the benefits respawn. So that makes it's super frustrating when you're like, you go through this whole thing, you go down one level, you climb upstairs, you go back the other way, and you miss a jump and you fall down to the previous section, and you have to go through the entire thing again with all the enemies back. Like, that is brutal. Yeah. And that's one thing that makes it tough. Another thing is, I feel like, and in my research, this seems to be true, there's a lot of randomization. So there's you can't really, in some cases, plan things out. I know this is, for example, true when it comes to the I guess the second last, when you're trying to face the Technodrome, which is one of the later bosses. Like, you have to find the Technodrome in one of the sewers, and there are a number of sewers in this top down area where you're going from sewer to sewer, and you can luck out and it can be in the very first sewer that's right there next to you. Or you can be unlucky and it can be randomly assigned to some sewer that is super far away and it is difficult to get to. So that also makes things feel tough and, as you said, sort of cheap, where you can sort of fall into the fact that you have to go through this entire thing to get to the same boss that could have been just right there for you. So the randomization. But I think the elephant in the room is all about one level, which is the swimming level. That is, I feel like we could do a whole podcast about that level. I remember when I put it back on to play it recently for the episode, I of course sort of went in blind initially. I was like, oh, let me see how far I can get, just playing it just without any foreknowledge and just going into it. And as soon as that swimming level came up, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. This was a source of a lot of frustration back in the day. But it's this level where you need to swim, and it sort of feels a little bit like the early Mario swimming levels. But I would argue not as good in terms of swimming.
Yeah. I think what you mean by that is like you're always falling like to gravity toward the bottom, but if you press A, you'll give yourself like a little stroke that lifts you up, right? You have to manage that, but not go too high and not go too low.
Exactly. And there's a lot of things that are janky about that swimming level, but included all the jankiness, which I'm happy to talk about, is the fact that it's timed, and your goal in this level is to like disarm these 8 bombs that are around, sort of like in an underwater maze sort of thing, without, you have like, I think 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And you have to, so you sort of have to rush, but also you have to avoid like all these obstacles that are, going to do you damage. And in fact, I think there are a couple places in that level where damage is unavoidable, which is also feels pretty cheap as well.
Yeah, I think so. I have to defend this level. I'm sorry. I know it was tough when I first played it, and it was all about the timer that really made it tough, right? Because it's stressful. You have to try to hurry and find them, and there are 7 or 8 bombs throughout this level. And you can miss 1 or 2 on your way. So you have to explore a little bit to find them all. So in my opinion, there was definitely trial and error here. You could not win this on your first try. You had to take a few attempts to play through.
Map it out.
Find where they were. Yeah, figure out where they were. Die a few times, come back and do it. But I think it was doable. I mean, I played it this time. I did it first try. No problem.
Yeah.
You take damage. And I think it's part of teaching you that you're going to take damage and you need to use the mechanism available to you of using a turtle to soak up damage from these electric beams and electric plants. And then when you get close, switch to someone else and use some of their health, and don't let them die. Preserve their life, but let them get hurt. And, rush your way through this place and undo the bombs or disarm the bombs. I remember it being hard. I don't have the hatred for it that I think a lot of people do.
I will agree with that. I think that you're right on both counts, that, it teaches you that you can't just try to like beat things perfectly, and the management is important. And I do agree that like after my first couple of failures this time, I was able to get through it. But I will say that I just think that the level itself and the controls are pretty janky.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I sort of looked this up because it just felt really wrong to me, and I just did a search for the TMNT NES water level, and sure enough, there's this breakdown by Displaced Gamers, and he broke down the code for the water level, and it turns out that it is really, really janky. Like, I didn't know this at the time, but like in retrospect, I felt it. But when if you push down in the water level, you're not actually doing anything. You're still going down at the rate of gravity. So like pushing down doesn't help you, and pushing up doesn't have you fight gravity. It's only when you like do the little burst that moves you up. And so it's just like and the hitboxes in the level are really weird. They're really weirdly designed. So it just feels odd. But yeah, it's not a huge inconvenience. I would say, like, as much as people claim it is, but it is just like I think it is like a not great level.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it's kind of cool that it's different. And I think that's a strength of this game, is that each area has you doing something specific and a little bit different, but maybe it just wasn't the best. What I really hate about it is when you're going across these holes in the ground, let's say, under the water, and you see this obviously dangerous, vibrant pink and purple, who knows what it is. It looks like plants that you think if you land in it, you're just going to be toast. And that's true. But you can't even get close to it because it'll just reach out and grab you.
Right.
I remember the first time that happened when I was a kid. I was like, come on. Really? It's already hard enough.
Right.
Like, just let me swim past this. And you don't know like exactly what the limit is, so you try to be as far away as you can without hitting maybe the electrified plants on the ceiling above it.
Right.
So that's kind of annoying. And there's one of those right at the very end of the area, like just before the last bomb. So you can get all of the previous bombs and then lose every turtle over and over. So yeah, I mean, I guess I have to concede that. But overall, for the overall game, the thing that bothered me the most was the respawning enemies. So we talked about Castlevania, and I already talked about Ninja Gaiden in a previous episode. And these three games are like the holy trinity of aggressively and egregiously respawning enemies when you take like a millimeter step backward and the screen goes back a little bit, and then you go forward and they're back again. But in this one, what makes it maybe the worst, possibly, is that when you step forward, the enemies aren't necessarily in the same place. It'll be like a different configuration. You mentioned randomization, and you'll just have 5 different enemies in different spots than they were 5 seconds ago. And that's just kind of nuts to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You can't plan out like a strategy because things may change.
Yeah. Plus you have the bounce back when you get hit.
Right.
So you can get knocked into a hole.
Some of those jumps are, you have to be like, some of the jumps are just so, you have to be so perfect with the jump. And then if you don't anticipate an enemy being there, you're just done.
Yeah. And there's typically an enemy there. So you have to do a jump where you kind of jump halfway across and then try to get back to the side that you started on so that you could spawn the enemy, but don't go back too far that they go off the screen because they'll respawn again.
That happens a lot.
So yeah, that's a lot. So, but luckily, in a lot of cases, the holes don't really kill you. They just take off a little bit of your health and send you back, so you don't lose your whole turtle. So that's cool.
Right.
And I want to say that there is some cheapness factor on the part of the player available for you to use as well. So you mentioned the pizzas. There's a very specific way that the pizza does and does not respawn. If you exit a building back to the overhead view of the street, or exit the sewer from the overhead view of the street and go back in, the pizza will be there again. But if you go from area to area within one of the side scrolling levels, it doesn't respawn. So there are a few locations where you have easy access to some pizza and you can refill all your turtles all at once and move on from there. But you have to do this sort of tedious go in, grab pizza, go out, go in, grab pizza, go out. Maybe get hurt a lot on the way and have to like spend extra time to do it. But you can, pardon the pun, you can cheese it that way. Which I did. Which I absolutely did.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. So you just have to recognize when a pizza is nearby an exterior exit and do not let it pass by if you want to win. Another thing is that when your turtles are killed, they're actually quote unquote caught. Right? They'll say, "Oh, Raph got caught." Yeah, and you're like, "What do you mean caught? He got run over by a truck."
Right.
But the thing is, there are areas in specific levels that usually they're empty, and you'll be like, what is this empty room for? But if you go in and you're missing a turtle, you'll see one of your turtles there tied up in rope, and if you jump into him, you get him back. You get one of them back, which is really cool. I find that, like, I don't know, that's ludo-narratively interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree. And it's such like a sort of exciting, happy moment when you find them like that.
The first time you see it, you're like, what? Yes. Yeah. I can't believe this. I thought he was dead.
I'm back. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh man. That's just such a good feeling. What are some other good feelings? Oh, so I want to go back to this respawning thing.
Yeah.
There are different sets of enemies that always come together. This is another way you can cheese the game, I think, because some of these sets of enemies are way tougher for me, maybe one set is tough for the way that I play. Maybe for you, a different set is real tough. But you have the opportunity to like go in and out of buildings, and maybe a different set of enemies will respawn.
Right.
And you'd be like, oh, it's the easy set. I'm going to do it. So that's another cheesy way to play this game that can really help you. Did you have a favorite set of enemies?
Not so much as definitely had one that I didn't like, which were the flying gun guys.
The flying gun guys. Oh yeah, that's toward the end. That might be in the Technodrome, right? It's like the new set of enemies.
Yeah, maybe.
They're like humans with guns.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Sort of white.
God.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Those are rough.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, they weren't in that. That's actually a cool thing about this game is that it was a great variety, and they all kind of had their own thing, right? Like they moved around in different ways. I mean, you could say great, or you could say annoyingly difficult, because you never know which way they're going to go.
Right. It's certainly some of that, but it was nice to like whenever you encountered a different group, it did feel different. It did feel like, okay, I've got to approach this in a different sort of way.
Yeah. So at least you're seeing new stuff as you go. But speaking of the areas, I guess now's as good a time as any. Each one had a different idea, right? You talked about Area 2 with the swimming and disarming the bombs. Then Area 3, what can you tell us about Area 3 with the turtle van?
Again, like you were saying, like how the swimming level feels like so distinct and so different than what you've been playing. When you're introduced to the turtle van in this top-down view, it just feels like you're playing like almost like another game thrown in there. It feels like a whole different thing. This is a top-down sort of view where you're riding in the party wagon, I think it's called, if memory serves, and you are you're sort of like encountering other vehicles, and you're sort of driving from building to building, and you can sort of explore buildings as you drive up to them. That's a really sort of interesting aspect of the game, this whole like top-down section.
Yeah, at this point, the story was you've gotten April back, right? And now you disarm the bombs. Now Shredder has taken Splinter and said, hey, come fight the Foot Clan. So now you're kind of searching the city for Splinter. And this one's interesting because it's organized in such a way that you have to find key items, which are missiles that your party wagon, turtle van, can shoot to destroy blockades on the road, and you have to go into these buildings to get enough of them to be able to progress to the end. So you find yourself going into various locations that might not lead anywhere. You go in, you explore it, you maybe get the missiles at the end, and then you come out. And then you move on. Now you have some missiles, you can access the next section and continue. And this makes the game feel like a little open world. It's not like a standard beginning to end game. And I didn't even realize that much when I was a kid. Like maybe you realize it sort of in the back of your mind, but with a closer critical eye to game design, you see, oh wow, this is an open world design on a very small scale. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Just again, it feels like you're it's like a whole another game, a whole different game. The same way that the swimming section feels radically different than the style of game we've been playing earlier. So I did enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah, another thing about that area is you have to get the rope, which is another special item that is kind of kept separate from your turtles' individual items, and that helps you go across the rooftops, which I remember being like a big annoying point for me when I was a kid. I remember not realizing I had to get the rope, even though if you pause the game, they'll say, find a rope and go from building to building. And coming to the top of the end of a building and seeing this weird pillar that denotes that you have to use the rope there, and just not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
And even if I had the rope, I didn't know to like walk close enough. I remember this distinctly. I remember walking up to it and thinking, well, I'm here. I have the rope. Now what? I like press select, start, whatever, did nothing. And then only after a bit of time just being upset that nothing's happening, taking a step forward, and the game just kind of automatically slings this grappling hook across. But that's cool too. And that kind of reveals another aspect of the game that is interesting, in that your areas make it so that you don't have to have a contiguous path on the overworld. Because if you're going into a sewer, you can go through a level, and then the designers, they can pop you up wherever they want because it's the sewer. So you can have a map that is kind of weird to explore by going in and out of these, what are essentially like warp pipes, like in Mario.
Right. Yeah.
And same thing for buildings that have the rope. Like if you go into a building, you have to come out of the building. But if it has a rooftop with the rope, now you can end up across the river.
Warping over.
Yeah. So I like that. That was kind of really interesting about Area 3. Both of those aspects. Super cool. Area 4 was my death area as a kid. God, the airport. Yeah. It seemed so simple this time. I don't know why. I just said, okay, there's a number in each area you go into. Now I'm at 1. Okay, I went through 1, I came up, oh, this is 2. I guess I'll go. The arrow's pointing forward, I'll continue. And I just kept going. If I went down 1 and the arrow was pointing backward, I didn't go that way. And I ended up making it to the end. But as a kid, it was impossible to figure out. Did you have difficulty with that, either as a kid or now?
Absolutely. Certainly as a kid. Now the aforementioned scrolls made it much easier, but yeah, no. I remember definitely feeling like the difficulty of the enemies you encountered felt like it ratcheted up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And there were a lot more sort of difficult jumps to make, and some jumps that were like, if you missed them, they were insta death jumps. So.
Oh, right. Or at least they would take you out of the level.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that was in those sewers in the airport area. You would land in the water and watch yourself flail. Why can't turtles swim, by the way?
Yeah, I know. So weird. It doesn't make any sense. But there were also some jumps where you had like spikes beneath you. And if you landed there, I think they were insta-death. I think they were like immediate.
Oh, yeah.
If memory serves, yeah.
Yeah, and this area kind of really got the level design to a complex sort of torture chamber of platforming. Man, yeah, some of those were super hard. It was basically just about like powering through it, taking some damage, and then switching to someone else, and then hoping you had a pizza area. But yeah, I realized that there was so much I just didn't have to go to. You know, if I got enough missiles in the turtle van area, I could just cruise through. You know, if I got one set of rope, I was good. So that was interesting to figure out also. Bosses. We had some bosses. We had a lot of mini bosses within the levels where you would get stopped, right? And then you'd have to beat them to move on. Kind of interesting choice, right? Like, I wonder why they did that. Because you don't win anything from them. You just kind of have to stop there. You have to beat this one enemy that's kind of a regular enemy.
Yeah, that was strange. There was no like sort of like fanfare to them. It's just like this one sort of thing sort of standing in your way weirdly. But
maybe it's a story beat because they were often Foot Clan members.
Yeah, perhaps.
Could be that. The bosses, though, were interesting.
And you mentioned like the player's ability to cheese the game. This is where it really comes through. The bosses plus Donatello equals a lot of cheesing. There's the famous, when you're playing Bebop, there's like a sort of like some crates, and if you stand on top of the crates, he can't get to you. But with Donatello's crazy reach, you can get to him and beat him there. There's a lot of stuff like that with Donatello, where you're basically out of the range of the enemies, and yet you're able to hit them yourself. Like Technodrome was the same thing.
Yeah.
And the big Mauser.
The Mauser especially. I realized you can just stand under his center line and just use the bow staff, and you just never get hit.
Yep.
I loved it. But I guess that's not good game design, unfortunately.
Sure. Yeah.
Probably the uncheesable boss was not Metalhead. What's he? Mecha Turtle. Confusable with Metalhead. Yeah, that's the one that's on the roof, and he just kind of moves around somewhat erratically.
Yeah,
and then changes.
That was a big use of scrolls.
Yes,
right there. I'll
same.
tell you that. Yeah,
I was like 100% scrolls here. You're just moving around too much, buddy. Let me stay on this side. You stay on that side. Take a scroll right to the face. So one other thing, like we mentioned a lot of the weird jumps and stuff. The jumping itself, I think, is another weird point about this game, because you have this jump that is extended. It's like an extended flip, and you jump really high and you can move around a lot in the air. But if you only tap the button, you do a jump where you don't go into the flip, and you can sort of manage your jump. But like you can do a really light tap and jump even less, and you can do like a middle amount, or you can do the full flip, and then you can find yourself pressing forward or backward and moving too much in midair. Was that a big deal for you? Because it was for me.
Yes, definitely. And there are some sections. I remember one spot in particular where there's a platform, but it's very narrow. Like you have to jump just right to get in there, and there's like a pizza there, and so you have to tap it in just the right way just to get enough power to go into the platform. But yeah, no, it was a huge part of it for me as well.
Man. Okay, so this is something that often comes first when we look at a game or listen to a game. We have the graphics and the sound. What do you think? Graphics and sound.
I mean, for the time, the graphics are fantastic. Just the four turtles being distinct and colorful and all that. I really liked the graphics. Obviously doesn't hold up to stuff today, but for the time, definitely was a big fan of the graphics for sure.
Yeah, I have to agree. Really gritty, right? Like everything looks different. The turtles look cool. They're big sprites. All the enemies are pretty big. The backgrounds are they're fine. They're not like the standout part, but I like all of the sprites, the enemies and stuff. Lots of flicker and slowdown though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
And how about the music?
I like the sound. I keep wishing, like every time like a new bit of music comes up, I always wish that it's like the theme song from the cartoon, because a lot of it feels like it's just getting there and then it's something else. But it is very evocative. Like when I started playing this, I was like, oh my gosh, like it really brings back memories because of just how rampant this game was at the time. Like everybody's playing it. I remember having friends over for playing it for hours, and just like hearing that music all the time was great. I will say one bit of sound that I didn't like was when you're low on health. That alarm that they do is pretty.
Don't wear headphones when you play this game.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, all in all, the music is great. The music's great.
Yeah, at least you know when to swap out your turtle.
Oh yeah,
like there's no way you're missing that you're low on health.
Yeah, it is not going to sneak up on you.
I love this music though. As far as the actual music tracks go, I find them almost as iconic to the Turtles franchise as the music from the cartoon. Because
I would agree with that. Yeah, no, that's true. That's very true for sure.
When I play it, everything I hear, I'm like, oh yeah, dun, 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 dun. That's just the Turtles song.
Oh yeah,
was never anywhere in the cartoon, but that is totally a Turtles song. I think the composer did a really fantastic job, and I love this music. I would listen to this just for the pure joy of hearing it. Okay, do you have any notable moments that we didn't talk about? Any favorite parts or parts that you hated that we just didn't get to?
I did sort of every time April pops up. What is it that she says?
You have my support.
You have my support. Yeah, she'll say like whatever is relevant to the level, and then she'll say, "You have my support," and it's just like just seeing her say, "You have my support" over and over again. It's just I always chuckled whenever that popped up. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it's funny though, like in some of the cases they could have used more of that space to tell you more about the level, but they had to put in the "you have my support." But I liked it, It feels good.
Yeah.
Having April there giving me her support.
Sure.
Great.
Sure.
Good friend. And actually I was surprised. I didn't really realize when I was a kid maybe that the pause screen had so much information. Like I noticed in the middle of a boss fight, if you pause, if you have Splinter at least, maybe if you have April too, they'll say, oh, use quick reactions and work together to win, something like that. Or if you're in the water level, April, I remember this, she'll tell you there are this many bombs left. Or if you're in the Turtle Van level, they'll say you have to get missiles to destroy the barricades.
Right.
Or in the pre-Technodrome level, they'll say if you go in the building, there's pizza and weapons. That was great. I was like, oh, pizza and weapons in the building. Then I went in the building and I was like, no, there's death in this building. I'm not even going in there. Because that was the one where you have to climb on the wall and you basically can't not get hit when you change screens. Because there are these like flying birds. I literally don't know how to get past any of that. I gave up completely there. Just went in the sewer, hoped I would find the Technodrome, and I did on the first try, luckily.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. All right, so final thoughts on Smashing Bricks. We like to go back and play these games and decide whether it was worth revisiting and whether other people should check it out in 2023 and beyond. So, if it is, we call it a smash. If it isn't, then it's more of a brick. So, what are your final thoughts, and would you call this a smash, or is it more of a brick?
This was a journey for me trying to figure out what I thought of this, because initially going into it, I thought it was going to be a brick for me, because I just remember, like one of the, there's a lot of memories tied up in this game, but one of them is definitely frustration. Like I remember being a kid and being frustrated by it. Again, especially when compared to the arcade and how like smooth and like fun that felt. So I started thinking like, oh, this is going to be fun, but it's probably not going to be a great game. Then I like oscillated. Then I would start playing and like, oh, actually, this is not as bad as I thought. I went to like more of a smash, and then I would get frustrated again and it would be more of a brick. But I think in the end, I definitely land on smash. I think in the end, I definitely enjoyed it. You put everything together, the uniqueness of having the 4 characters. I still think that's such a great mechanism. Like you said, like the larger, like the art of it, the larger sprites, like everything felt really sort of like, I don't know, very, very fun and vibrant. And so yeah, in the end, I came around, and really did enjoy my time with this for sure. So I would definitely say smash.
Woo! I'm gonna say brick. No, I'm just kidding. I have a lot of nostalgia for this game. Yeah, and that's fine. But I've played games that I loved before and came back to them and then said, maybe not. This isn't one of them. I played it.
Yeah.
Maybe I like it even more now that I'm older and more skilled or something. Yeah. And I have some more appreciation of different approaches to game design and different intentions of designers for what they want you to do and how they want you to achieve success. And I just find that this game gives you a lot of tools. It gives you a lot of different ways to play, different gameplay options, and it lets you, it's cheap to you, but it lets you be cheap back. That's not the best game design technically, but it's a fun playground with a great theme. Obviously, the Ninja Turtles are among the best properties ever made, in my opinion. And the gameplay is fun, even if it's hard. I think it's fun. You feel rewarded when you win. Yeah. So yeah, smash for me.
I would agree. I agree
for sure. Okay, so with that, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the Nintendo Entertainment System is a smash and is worth revisiting in 2023 and beyond. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and for playing along with us. And thank you, Mark, for joining me on the show today yet again.
My pleasure.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely my pleasure.
If you'd like to direct our listeners to something you're doing in the internetosphere, let us know.
I continue to be doing the Board Game Barrage podcast, so you can find us wherever you found this podcast. Just search out Board Game Barrage if you're interested in board games, and we're still at it. So
very cool. I love that podcast. My favorite board gaming podcast is Board Game Barrage. Thank you. Okay, so go find Mark there, but first take a look at whatever podcasting platform you're on right now. And if you've made it this far, feel free to leave us a generous and helpful 5-star rating and review. It's totally free. And if you want to go above and beyond that and support the show monetarily while getting some fun perks, head over to patreon.com/smashingbricks and become a patron for as little as $1 a month. You could also jump in at the awesome Fireflower tier and choose a specific game to be played on an upcoming Power Up episode. You can read my personal notes for each game we play. You can get ongoing recognition on the show, or you can even join me on a guest episode at one of the higher tiers of support. Again, patreon.com/smashingbricks. Smashing Bricks has a Discord, which is our cozy place to chat about anything with the community and to leave commentary about upcoming and past games or suggest games to be considered for the show. Check out the Smashing Bricks playlist to see what you think needs to be added or played immediately. Links to everything mentioned, plus Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch can be found in the episode description and at our link tree, which is linktr.ee/smashingbricks. As for next episode, I'll be joined by Leon Cox of the Cane and Rinse podcast to play and discuss Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive. So get your hands on a copy, play along, send in your thoughts, and join us next time on Smashing Bricks. That about wraps it up for today. I'm still Eddie Inzauto. That is Mark Besada. Thanks again, Mark. And until next time, may the nostalgia be with you.